Jeremy Scahill is an international, unembedded journalist traveling to wars all over the world. He's written books like Dirty Wars, Blackwater, and The Assassination Complex. He's also one of the founding editors of online newspaper The Intercept. On September 19, 2016, he spoke at the Madison Public Library.
You can see just the fine quality of reporting that Jeremy was doing from the ground. Really, as he will tell you, going to the other end of the barrel of the gun of U.S. foreign policy and seeing what's happening to everyday people on the ground and then bringing their stories and their voices out. And so it's really a great pleasure to welcome to Madison investigative journalist, war reporter, and great comrade of community media, Jeremy Scahill.
I just realized that I have an empty notebook in my bag that I normally would put in front of me to pretend like I actually have notes. It's funny, I was watching, I watched that movie Recount at one point when it came out about the 2000 election, and David Boyce, one of the lawyers, he's dyslexic. I'm not dyslexic, but he's one of the lawyers for Gore's campaign that argued the Supreme Court is dyslexic, and so he has to memorize all of his speeches, including when he's giving these very complicated legal analyses and arguments for the Supreme Court. So I sometimes think about that because I generally do not speak with any real notes, but I often do have the safety blanket of an empty notebook in front of me to pretend like I'm reading from some notes, so I feel like I'm not completely alone, but I just can't walk over there to get an empty notebook. Disclosure done. Norm Stockwell, who of course was just up here, he's been a friend of mine for I guess about 20 years, and I met him here in Madison when I would say that I was enrolled as a student. I wouldn't say that I was a student, at least not in the sense that I was attending classes, but I was enrolled at various times at MATC, and then I pulled a really great scam to be accepted on special student status into the University of Wisconsin at one point. But I can't really say that I attended many classes here at all. But the first window I had into the world of community media was at WORT, and myself and another student who was an activist on the campus, now is a lawyer in New York, working with tenants on tenant right issues named Vance Gathing. We had come in to WORT at Norm's invitation to do some stuff for the Insurgent Radio Kiosk, one of the recurring programs on WORT. And it was really, to me, I had never seen anything like that radio station. And as I got to know Norm over the years through different projects, and as he says, when I was on my way to Yugoslavia to cover the war there, I did call Norm because I didn't know really how to edit on a mini disc, and I didn't have a computer. And Norm basically talked me through how to manually edit on this machine so that I could do reporting that would include the voices of many people and not just me talking on a bad telephone line from somewhere. And then we figured out a way to dismantle, and this is a whole other story that at some point I can tell anyone that actually wants to geek out about it. We figured out a way to circumvent the firewall on Iraq's internet that Saddam's secret police had built, and we were smuggling uncensored video out of Iraq back to Democracy Now! In New York. And that was a project that, I was on the ground in Iraq, and then we had Jackie, my colleague, her husband was on the ground in New York helping us to get these things out. But then the nerve center of the whole thing and the web master of it was here in Madison at WORT, Norm Stockwell, while we were covering the sort of war in Iraq. And I was talking to Norm throughout the entire time we would be in Iraq. I don't know what Norm's phone bill was like, but he would call me like from his home phone or his cell phone. He would call me like a hotel in Baghdad. And he's really a selfless, incredible person. And the fact, he's not at WORT now, he's at the Progressive, but his legacy at WORT is that he brokered a a relationship between Madison and this community in the form of its radio station and so much of the rest of the world. Wart is known by community radio people all over the globe, and the kinds of programming that has been done on Wart and the volunteers that have come through and then gone on to do other things, and they got their training at Wart, really is something incredible. And to me, that station has always embodied the spirit of what community media should look like, and the idea of trying to serve the community. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that I'm really, I admire Norm Stockwell, and I thank him for all of the support, technical and personal and everything over the years. And you know, I know that the people at you know, Wart has so many great people, but it's Wart's loss and now the Progressives' gain that Norm is there, and I think you guys have it's a fortunate thing in this community that you have great institutions like Wart and like the Progressive magazine. It's also really amazing to see this structure here. When I was not a student here, enrolled as a student but not a student here, I lived a few blocks away, and before I was able to figure out how to get an ID at the University of Wisconsin so I could use libraries there, I came to this library all the time, and it's just a very different place now. I mean, it's kind of astonishing and amazing. You know, and when I walked in here tonight, I saw members of Clarence Kalin's family. Of course, Clarence Kalin always, if he was alive still, he'd be sitting right where you are. He came, and for those of you who don't know who he was one of the last surviving veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, the international brigades that traveled from all over the world, but the ones from the United States organized under the banner of, they were called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, to go to Spain to fight against what they sensed was going to be a rising tide of fascism in Europe. And this was at a time when the powerful in the United States were doing one of two things: either in bed with the fascists, either financially or politically or otherwise, or they were just turning a blind eye to it. And Clarence, as a young man, went to Spain and fought. And you know, I had gotten to know him over the years, and I would see him. He would always be at all of the events. And I got a phone call about a year and a half ago. It's Clarence just letting us know he's still here. I'm gonna just go on the presumption that was thunder. For now, we may end up in a very interesting situation tonight. Anyway, I got a phone call, Clarence. Thank you for interrupting. From the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archive, and they said that they were in the process of determining the winners of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Human Rights Award. And I thought that they wanted to ask me to be on the jury or something. And then they said, well, no, actually, you're going to be one of the recipients of it. And it was myself and a Mexican journalist, an incredible Mexican journalist named Lydia Cacho, who's a very, very brave author, journalist, and just incredible person. So the two of us were awarded this prize jointly earlier this year, and in part I dedicated the prize to Clarence, and also then gave back as much as they would let me a portion of the prize money associated with it to be used for the operations of the archive, so it could keep going, and put that donation in Clarence's name. So for me, this community, I'm from Milwaukee, my roots are here, but also there are personal, political, justice-oriented roots and connections that stay with me every day, and have stayed with me as I've done the journalism that I've tried to do over the years. So it's really just great always to be home. The book that this event is organized around is, my name is on it, and Edward Snowden's name is on it, and Glenn Greenwald's name is on it, and that's what publishers do if they want to sell a book or try to sell a book. They think that, if you put this person's name here and there, and it's not that I didn't. This was my project, and I coordinated and did everything. But the book, if you look at all the contributors, it really is a kind of view into the sausage making of investigative journalism. How many people have to work on these kinds of stories that involve complicated documents and acronyms and secretive units, etc. So many people, put in so much time to make this book a reality, and so in the one sense, it is. I coordinated this project. The source, who's a confidential whistleblower who worked on the U.S. assassination program and provided me with these documents, was someone that I spent a lot of time with, developed a relationship based on trust with, and then that person, in an incredibly brave act of conscience, said, I want these to be published, because at the time when we first started publishing these documents, and to this day actually, there has never been any kind of a significant leak of classified information on how the drone program operates, on what officials sign off on the target lists of people who are going to be assassinated or put into the kill-capture matrix by the U.S. intelligence community. And what we see in the documents that we published in this book and in the analysis and interviews that we did with people who worked on these programs is that what has been created under both the Bush-Cheney administration and then Obama's time in office is what amounts to a parallel extrajudicial judicial system for determining who lives and who dies on any given day around the world. And it is a system that has prosecutors, judges, juries, and an executioner. And that executioner has henchmen and women who go and do the executioner's bidding. But none of these proceedings can be attended by the public. The judge actually isn't a judge. The prosecutor actually isn't a prosecutor. The jury actually isn't of anyone's peers. It's in reality small committees of made up of overwhelmingly unelected individuals. The judge himself is elected because he's the president of the United States, but almost no one else in that process has anything even vaguely resembling the checks and balances that our foundation of government is supposed to be solidified by. So if we talk about it in sort of plain terms, and what does it mean, it really is that we in this society have stood by and watched as both the cartoonish villain, Dick Cheney, and the constitutional law scholar, Obama, have come together to build what amounts to a secretive legal system where you are not allowed to appeal. In fact, you're not even allowed to know that you've been convicted of anything, because you're not actually being indicted in a court. You are being indicted in a secret process of people meeting on Tuesdays. They call it Terror Tuesday meetings at the White House, and they are assembling statistics on people drawn from the terror watch list, from the surveillance that they do, that Edward Snowden, of course, exposed by leaking the original set of documents on the NSA. And then they're looking at who are they talking to and what are they involved with. And in some cases, the people that they say, well, we're going to go and kill this person or capture this person, I think would objectively be viewed as involved with criminal or terroristic activity. But some people, they just they're still putting them forward for assassination or death by drone or capture based on very little, if any, evidence, based on metadata, based on the little bits of anonymized, supposedly, information that your phone emits or your email, the traces that your emails leave. And there are two basic kinds of operations that can be used to implement the death penalty that has been ordered by the judge, the president, in this parallel, Alice in Wonderland judicial system. And that is that you can either be killed through what's called a personality strike, which means that it's a specific individual that they've decided they want to kill, and they pursue that person, and then they make determinations of, is it okay to kill them if they're with this many people? How certain are we that they're in this building? Okay, we know this is their mobile phone. We have it tracked to this building. Do we have anyone that can confirm that they're on the ground? This whole decision-making process is part of that. Then the other way is what's called a signature strike. Signature strike means they don't have to know the identity of the person that they intend to kill. They just need to know that this person's pattern of life mostly, where has their phone been geographically? Who are they texting with? Are they texting with other numbers that are on the terror watch list? Was their phone ever in the same location as other phones that we're monitoring? What areas of the world are they in? Are they in this part of Pakistan? Are they in this part of Yemen? And once you start to build up enough of a sort of series of documentations on their network, where they are, who they're communicating with, then there's this huge leap that happens where they say, well, they must be terrorists or militant, or if they're with a group of military-aged males, which they've defined as anywhere from 13 to 76, if enough military-aged males are in the same location with phones that have been in touch with these people and these people and these people, they must be up to no good. And so in both Yemen and Pakistan, under both Bush and Obama, they have authorized, the president has authorized the killing of individuals intentionally whose identities they don't even know. I mean, it's really the total opposite of the idea of due process. And it's all being done in the name of our security. And the idea is that we are going to take the fight to the terrorists where they are so that they don't come back to where we are. But the reality is that this system has had the opposite effect of what they state the intent is. It's actually encouraging people, not necessarily to become terrorists or join terrorist organizations, but to view themselves as having a legitimate score to settle against the United States or against the West, writ large. And we see this happening throughout the Arabian Peninsula, certainly throughout North and East Africa. We are seeing a radical increase, not in the number of people that are supporting ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but in the number of people who are starting to view the United States as a gratuitous enemy at war with a religion. And we can scream until we're blue in the face how America has freedom of religion, and we're not really at a war against religion, even though George Bush did use the term crusade early on. But let's put that aside for a moment. If you are a young person growing up in Palestine, or you're growing up in parts of the Middle East, or Northeast Africa, or the Arabian Peninsula, and your society has been obliterated, and there is no civil society left, and there is no clean drinking water, as in the case of Yemen right now, and there's this epic famine happening, and the missiles that are raining down on your country literally say that they're made in the USA, on the cluster bombs that the Saudi planes are dropping on Yemenis. How are you going to view that country, the country where the bombs came from, the country that is allowing your next door neighbor, Saudi Arabia, to just destroy one of the oldest civilizations in the world? We're encouraging a whole generation of young people growing up in Muslim countries to actually believe what at one point maybe was just rhetoric. But now there's evidence that it's true. This is a real thing. This is not fiction. This is not, Chalmers Johnson long ago wrote a book called Blowback. And he was so right in how our own foreign policy comes back around, boomerangs back around, and then we're faced with the very threat we claim to be fighting is now at our doorstep because of things that we've done in one part of the world, and then they cause a reaction in our own backyard or our own front yard. And I've been seeing this now in my whole 20-something years working in journalism, over and over and over again. We are creating the very threats we claim to be opposing. And we have a president now in Obama who, rather than sort of really reimagining how the United States could engage the Muslim world or certain Arab countries, or have a creative approach to confronting, well, why are people joining some of these organizations? What are their key propaganda tools? Is there something we can do to kind of tilt this in a different direction? He doubled down on some of the most extreme aspects of the Bush-Cheney assassination program. Yes, he stopped extraordinary renditions, but the U.S. is still rendering people. Yes, he's now ordered that the CIA is not allowed to torture people. Well, now we just leave them in a jail in Somalia, wink, wink, and we'll come back in a few days and talk to them and see if their mind has changed about talking to us. It's what happened under Clinton. Under Clinton, the U.S. was doing renditions. And in fact, that's when the program was created. General Hugh Shelton, who was the chair of the Joint Chiefs, when I spoke to him a few years ago, he was chair of the Joint Chiefs under Clinton and then Bush. He told me that at one point under Clinton, they actually rendered someone on his plane when he was the chair of the Joint Chiefs and flew him back to the United States on General Hugh Shelton's own plane. He was talking about it like, this is great. We're bringing these people to justice. So the idea of rendition didn't begin with Bush and Cheney. The point I'm getting at is that what Obama served up as this sort of ending the excesses of the Bush era really just kind of said, well, we'll do it the way that Clinton was doing it before. And the point of the whole thing is all the same. Whether a CIA agent named Joe Smith is pulling the fingernails out, or you get some thugs, Mukhabarat chief, to pull the fingernails out, the fingernails are still getting pulled out, and the reason they're getting pulled out is because you put that person there. And you put them there because you want to soften them up. So, it's sort of like playing with words at times with Obama, and it boils down to semantics. But more than that, he gave greater latitude to special operations forces, greater latitude than they've had since they were engaged on the ground in Vietnam, where the United States was engaged in a horrifying ground war. They were given ability to strike in record numbers of countries around the world, far beyond the standard under Bush-Cheney outside of the initial year after 9/11. The initial year after 9/11, they were everywhere. And then things started to kind of retract, and they were sort of limiting it to it. Obama signed a series of executive orders when General David Petraeus was the head of CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command, responsible for the Middle East, allowing special operations forces to function in a covert capacity, the way that the CIA would typically operate in a covert capacity, rather than in a clandestine capacity. What's the difference between those two things? A clandestine operation means that the mission is secret until it's done, and then the United States will take responsibility or ownership for it. A covert activity means that the United States can keep it secret in perpetuity, that it has plausible deniability built into it, that the United States can seek to lie or blame whatever action was taken under a covert operation on other forces, or to say, well, we don't know anything about that. When you have the U.S. military now operating in a covert capacity around the world, including when they've been accepted into countries as military liaisons, then it creates a whole question about international relations. And Cheney and Bush started this, and then Obama expanded it. And he radically expanded the number of drone strikes. He began widening the so-called sandbox, is what they call it, for the signature strikes, where they're killing people based on this metadata system. Then they start prosecuting people who are blowing the whistle. Record numbers of people prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Earlier today, when I was at Madison College, I was talking with students and faculty and some folks there, from the community, and I was sort of saying that the way that the Obama administration has taken the ball and run with it from Bush and Cheney is something extraordinary to behold, because if a Republican had been elected, if John McCain had been elected in 2008, or Romney had been elected in 2012, there's no way you would have seen 70% of self-described liberal Democrats saying they support drone strikes. It just wouldn't have happened. It happened because people said, well, I trust Obama. And that's fine. I mean, I get that. I can understand why people would say, well, I trust Obama more than Cheney. But that's not how accountability works. And that's certainly not how anyone should ever approach the powerful. Well, I just trust them to do the right thing. No, never trust them to do the right thing. There's a reason we want checks and balances, and there should be accountability, and there's a reason why we need an actual independent press, which sometimes we don't actually have really in this country. But the point being that Obama used his legitimacy as an incredibly smart, articulate, energetic, well-educated constitutional law expert to say, all of this is fine. All of this is perfect. And if Obama's saying it, well, it must be true. What do we know? And the legacy is going to be that he made possible a continuation of these programs at a time when everyone in this country was just sick of the Bush-Cheney war stuff, sick of the Iraq war, sick of Afghanistan. Then comes Obama, and it's sort of like cleaning up the empire, getting liberals on board with it, to the point where, like, if the next time there is a Republican president, how are Democrats going to actually oppose anything? Well, actually, those are Republican cruise missiles that we're against, not the Democratic one. There is no Democratic or Republican cruise missile. There's cruise missiles. And so we've made huge mistakes by ceding too much of our conscience or our decision-making to the powerful. It's not so much about who we vote for on Election Day. It's what are we doing in the periods that come between. That's when life is actually lived. That's when wars are started. It's not, electing any one person is not going to be, the end all be. It's what is going to happen once those people are in office. I'm not saying voting isn't important, but if you think that's the duty and then we do it and we're done, no. And we've learned that lesson, I think, through history. Whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and there's different things we can talk about with both of them. And if people want to talk about that, we can do it during, when we have a discussion. But both of them are going to be candidates of empire. It's just Hillary is the candidate of empire. She is like a walking, breathing hedge fund for corporate and empire interests. And then Donald Trump is, he will outsource that part of running the empire to others, and then he'll just be the fascist in chief, where his job is going to be sort of whiff's essence of Hitler while trying to run the United States like one of his reality shows. I can understand why people would say, well, I'm going to vote for Hillary. Just on the issue of Supreme Court appointees alone, I'm not going to tell anyone in this country, oh, well, actually, Hillary's part of the problem, too. But I don't care. I don't want to tell anybody who to vote for. I don't like any of them. I want a multi-party system. I want corporations out of our government. We're not going to get that right now. The best chance we had was Bernie Sanders, and he blew it at the end. He could have done something that shattered the myth of that system, as he was doing a lot by saying things that many people in this room already know. You've heard it over and over. But he was the first viable candidate to be saying them in a long, long time. And at the end, it's like he runs, he comes so close to getting the nomination, and then it's like, and you should vote for Hillary. But what if he had sort of actually thrown the gauntlet down about this stuff and demanded something in return from Hillary's camp for his cheap bargain of an endorsement that they got? What if he had said, I was talking about this with students earlier, what if Bernie Sanders had actually said, use your imagination, I'm not going to endorse Hillary Clinton. I will endorse Jill Stein and Gary Johnson if they run together, libertarians and Greens. Now, that may be offensive to some people in this room, both libertarians and Greens, but imagine if the point of it was, we want to get them on the debate stage, we want to try to qualify a third party for funding. They may not have won the election. They probably stood no chance of winning it. But why did Bernie's popularity rise? It rose because people got to hear his voice. Bernie actually is a cranky, unlikable person who somehow managed to be likable enough when they pushed him out there to make it work. There are so many more charismatic people than Bernie that could have been doing that, but he didn't. And why did his popularity go up? Because the media started covering it. Hillary Clinton was terrified to say his name for months, and then she had to start saying his name. And once she had to start saying his name, then the media started paying attention. Who's this Bernie Sanders? And now everybody in this country knows who Bernie Sanders is. And so many people in this country heard for the first time about a rigged system. And Bernie gave the same speech over and over and over. But it was a pretty good speech. And it pretty much captured a big part of the problem that we have in this country. But we also have a problem, we get afraid of our own shadows. Dennis Kucinich, I would ask him for years, why do you stick with the Democrats? You're on that debate stage in Baltimore. Why don't you run as Green Party? Well, I cast my lot with the Democrats. Dennis Kucinich. Bernie Sanders said he wasn't even a Democrat. It wouldn't be that hard for him. He could just say, well, I wasn't even a Democrat, so I'm gonna join the Green Party. But it's like there's only so far anyone seems willing to take it. And that's why the kind of stuff that we're writing about here endures. You're not going to change the U.S. war machine or the unelected national security bureaucracy by willing them away. It's not about, well, if we just elect this president for one more term, he's going to have a secret agenda to stop all the bad stuff. That was my favorite part of when Romney and Obama were running. The people were saying, you can't criticize Obama because Romney's going to win, right? And Obama has this plan. Trust me, in the second term, the real Obama's going to arrive. And it's like, oh, the real Obama's been here for quite some time. You just haven't been paying attention. That is how he is. He is like, his domestic policies are sort of like centrist Republican 90s, not Newt Gingrich Republican 90s, but his domestic view of economics and healthcare, it's pretty much, middle-of-the-road Republicans from the 90s. Nixon is to the left of Obama on a lot of, it's true. Janet Stevens here is professor of history. Nixon was to the left of Obama on a lot of domestic issues. On a foreign policy level, well, let's see, how many wars, and how you define war is an interesting question, but let's see, we've got Afghanistan, we have Honduras. I don't know how we would categorize Haiti. That's sort of neoliberal war that was continued under Obama, but that's okay. So we've got Libya, regime change. We have Yemen, support for the dictator, then drone bombing, now support for Saudis bombing. You have Egypt, where they loved Mubarak, then they didn't like Mubarak. then they wanted elections, then the wrong people won the elections. Then we hated Mubarak, but then Mubarak should be free. And then General Sisi, who's like Mubarak except with a different name, oh, he's the guy for us. That's Egypt, so I don't know how you would categorize that. Then you have Syria, where we had a debate about whether or not the US should get involved in Syria, when the US was involved with Syria for a very long time, including under Bush, when they were sending people there under the rendition program to be tortured in Syria by Assad's intelligence service at the request of the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. And then we were there, and we were backing this certain rebel group, and John McCain shows up, and he's going to vet the rebels. You know, remember that whole thing? We're going to have the responsible rebels. The CIA had a covert program, and then it turned out that the CIA was giving money to one faction, and then the military's people on the ground were giving money to a faction that was killing the CIA's faction. So we were debating whether or not we should get involved with Syria. And by involved, what they meant is should we overtly launch missiles into Syria, when we already were deeply involved. Every time you read about Qatar or the UAE doing anything, that actually is, the United States is doing that thing. They are now the proxies for the US, just as the Saudis in Yemen are doing the bidding of the United States. So if you start to look at Obama now, we're back in Iraq with a vengeance. Iraq surged in Afghanistan, said he was going to pull out, oh, now we're going to have to keep this force in Afghanistan, increased covert actions in Pakistan, regime change in Libya, supported 2 dictatorships, and supported the overthrow of the first democratically elected president in the history of Egypt. Then Yemen mercilessly allowed the utter destruction of Yemen. Then you had the coup in Honduras. And this is just now talking about like actual campaigns of CIA and military. We can then get into how they, under Obama, economically destabilized countless countries. I didn't even talk about what they've done in Somalia, what's happening right now in Sudan, in Congo. The point is, how do you say, what is Obama? Is Obama a left-winger? Is Obama a liberal? How do you categorize this? We don't really have 2 parties in this country. It appears as though we have these very different parties because we have crazy-ass Trump on the one hand, and then you have, Hillary on the other hand, who is really, the officialdom candidate. But that's a mirage. If it was anyone else but Trump, Hillary would be finished already. The election would be done for because her unpopularity ratings are so incredibly high. She's just lucky that someone like Trump is there. And part of it is real sexism against Hillary Clinton, and there's the way that people talk about Hillary Clinton is I think, overtly misogynistic at times and very sexist. But that doesn't make her a good person. Her policies are atrocious. She was deeply involved with the assassination program. She's deeply involved with regime change. She can't distance herself from the politics of her husband's presidency because they campaigned on the idea that America was getting 2 for 1. So you can't say, oh, well, that was Bill, when you were at one time saying, well, it's both of us for the price of one. She's been deeply involved with all of these things. So, and her unpopularity, in part, is based on that stuff, but not mostly. Mostly it's based on right-wingers don't like any powerful women, and they think of Hillary as a bitch. And that's the reality of why her unpopularity numbers are so high. But the idea that that translates into then, let's support Trump, is not quite working. The neocons all love Hillary. The Weekly Standard, they're backing Hillary. Max Boot, who's never met a war, he doesn't want someone else's kids to fight, he's backing Hillary. There's all these conservatives for Hillary. People that were like architects of the Iraq invasion and war and occupation, they would say, well, Hillary's better for us. The question for anyone voting for Hillary right now, and I don't really know, I don't have any friends who are like, oh my God, I'm with her. Maybe there are people in this room that are really with her, but I don't know people like that. I know people who are like, yeah, I'm gonna vote for Hillary. The question for them though is like, what does it feel like to be on the same side as like William Crystal? You know? Really, I think that would creep me out and make me feel like I was really doing something in life wrong. If like Paul Wolfowitz and I were voting for the same person for president, I'd be like, oh man, am I wearing like a shit suit where I'm just slimy? It's terrible. But that's the nature of where we're at right now in this election year, which is why I think it's not about necessarily who you vote for. It's what happens in between that. And the program that we wrote about here, if you read the book, and we tried to arrange it in a way that basically would take you on a tour of how someone can end up being put into the matrix of all these watch lists. And there's different levels of the terror watch list, but anyone, and I've been on and off lists, and I know it because I've been detained at airports. It doesn't mean the government is spying on me necessarily, or mean that they're monitoring me or following me around the world. It means that at some point, someone within the US intelligence community nominated me for the watch list. That's what they call it, nominations. Like, usually a nomination is a good thing. Like, oh, what have you been nominated for? Well, class president, what about you? Oh, for the terror watch list. Great, okay. So somebody at some point nominated me, and so I was put onto a watch list, and it probably, and we go through all the different kinds, probably was one for people who are traveling to a variety of countries, and I think it was probably someone who doesn't like me, basically said with an unknown purpose. So I would come back and I would get detained at JFK Airport in New York or Newark in New Jersey, and I would get taken to, for secondary screening, and they would ask me, do I have any military experience? Do I own any weapons? And but I would always be the only white person in the room. I would often walk in and there would be families of brown people, often people from Middle Eastern countries or from Pakistan or Bangladesh. And they would be there when I was taken to the room, and then they would still be there when I did my interview and left the room. And once I actually did an experiment, I was coming back from Yemen, and and I was in Egypt, and the secret police in Egypt, the Egyptian secret police, they told me that I was flagged by the United States and that they needed to interrogate me, and they wanted to take me upstairs in the Cairo airport. And I learning a lesson from Amy Goodman, I just went full-blown ugly American, started screaming, I'm an American! I'm not going to go somewhere in secret with the Muhabarat of what government in Egypt at that time. It was like, who's even in power here? So I threw this fit, and finally, I got them to just leave me alone, and I go and I'm sitting in the waiting area where our flight's going to board for New York, from Cairo, Egypt Air flight. And there was this family sitting across from us. It was a man, a woman, and they had 2 kids. One of the kids was probably, 18 months old, sort of just getting his bearings and running. And I was kind of playing with the kids a little bit as we were sitting there. And so I just remember this family, Rick Rowley, who directed Dirty Wars, he and I were kind of both playing. They wanted to look at his camera. So we then fly into JFK. Rick goes through, no problem. I get flagged for secondary screening, as I knew I was going to, because, in fact, I tweeted about it at the time. I tweeted the picture of my ticket with the S's on it and said, it's going to be interesting when I get to JFK. So I get taken in then for the secondary screening, and this family is in there that was there before. And they were there when I got in. And so I went up to them in Area 2, they call it, at JFK, and I started to say hi to them, and these agents come over. No talking in here. It was like the scene from Arrested Development. No touching. Anyway, they come up and no talking here. And they made me sit in a totally different area from those people. These people looked completely terrified. I get called up then, and the officer from Homeland Security, maybe, who was interviewing me, was a guy who had, just on my previous time I was detained, been the guy interviewing me. And we had kind of a funny interaction at that previous one about what questions he's allowed to ask me, because he tried to ask me what I was doing in Yemen, and I said, none of your business. And then he said, well, do you have any military experience? And I'm like, you can Google me. I'm the opposite of having military experience. Anyway, we had this whole thing. He remembered me, so he's like, okay, I don't know how you ended up on this thing. Somebody nominated you. He's basically saying stuff he's not supposed to say. So he's like, I'm gonna resolve this. You shouldn't have any more trouble. I'm gonna put something in the system that notes that you've been interviewed, whatever it was. Anyway, I leave. But I decided to stay and see, when this family came out, because I wanted to ask them what happened. And I waited in the airport 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. I was sitting there for 5 hours. I was sitting there drinking coffee just across from where people would be coming out in the terminal at JFK, and they never emerged. And I called a couple of times. I didn't know their name or anything. So I have no idea. My guess is that they probably deported them. I have no idea, what happened. But this is a family with small kids, including a probably 18-month-old or younger that's running around. It's like, I'm thinking, what could they possibly have done? Visa violation, false declaration, I have no idea. But the point is, I go into those situations, I know I'm coming out. They're not going to kill me. They're not going to disappear me in those airports. I would be horrified. I would be terrified if I was anyone else sitting in that situation, where a country that has taken people around the world to be tortured, that does operate an offshore gulag, that has asserted the right to snatch people and kill people anywhere, anytime, with any justification that, by the way, we're going to keep secret. I'd be terrified of those people if I encountered them in a section of an airport inside of the United States, or any airport for that matter around the world. And by the way, as US citizens, this has actually been
litigated all the way to the Supreme Court. You have no constitutional rights in an airport. There is no such thing as the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment in an airport. Nothing. Search and seizure, they can take everything. You make the mistake of not having a password on your computer and your email is open, they not only can look at everything in your computer, now your email is fair game. They don't need a warrant to go after it. Doesn't matter that you are a US citizen. It's the massive area of exemption. When you are in an airport and you have your electronic devices or anything, you have no freedom of speech and you have no right protecting you from unjustified search and seizure of your possessions. And if you're not an American, Americans don't have constitutional rights in the airport. Imagine what non-Americans don't have. They don't have anything at all. So, the process of being put onto these watch lists can be extraordinarily damaging for particular kinds of people in the world. What do I mean by that? Well, I just told you about being white. I go in there. I was somehow on the watch list for a while. Now I'm off the watch list. I go in. I know they're not going to send me to Gitmo. I know I'm not going to get killed or tortured or anything. I know that I'm going to basically, tell them to fuck off. And I want a lawyer. I know I don't have a constitutional right in here, but I'm not going to say anything to you. And if you want to arrest me, then arrest me. And I can do that because I have privilege in this society. Because I happen to be white, I happen to be a man, and I happen to be someone that if you Google, you can see that I'm a journalist. So I can be like that. So many young Muslim journalists come up to me and say, I can't say any of the things that you would say. And I know that. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about ordinary people who happen to be Muslim, or happen to be people of color, or happen to have relatives in Pakistan, or Afghanistan, or Iraq, or Bangladesh, or Syria, or any number of scenarios. And when you get put onto the watch list, you can be put on based on one unverified Twitter post. You can be put on for something you wrote on Facebook. You can be put on if your number is in the phone of someone whose number was in the phone of someone who was stopped at an airport somewhere and they thought the way he was answering the questions were a little bit suspicious. So you get these hops where you go from one person infects the next person, infects the next person, infects the next, and it just spreads like that to the point where there are just hundreds of millions of people who are in this network of people whose data can be accessed at any given moment. And the thing is, there's no distinction for most people who end up looking at the watch list as part of their jobs in law enforcement or intelligence between Osama bin Laden, who was on the watch list, and some kid from Madison who wrote something stupid on Facebook. Just to give these as an example. They both are designated as what's called a KST, a known or suspected terrorist. And if you get pulled over here in Madison or elsewhere, and you run someone's license, and they happen to be in the watch listing system, and your city is participating in the programs with the federal government on this stuff, what the officer who's pulled you over could potentially see is a designation that you are a known or suspected terrorist. What do you think a lot of people, especially when you go into more rural areas, if they see that on their terminal, that the person they've pulled over is a known or suspected terrorist, they're not going to think, well, that was probably some kid who wrote something dumb on Facebook and his number happened to be in some... No, you're going to think, holy shit, there's a suicide bomber in this car. Or, oh my God, I better pull my gun out. But also when people apply for jobs with the federal government and then they do the check on them, well, it says they're a known or suspected terrorist. Now, there could be a way that someone says, well, this is what that means, this person, and explain the sort of circumstances. No. You're not allowed to even know if you're on the watch list. You can't appeal the fact that you're on the watch list. In fact, if you ask them about it, they say, oh, yes, you can. You have to write a letter. We're not going to tell you if you are or not, but you can write us a letter asking us to reconsider your inclusion on the watch list, but we're never going to tell you if you're on it or if we've taken you off of it. But have a nice day. And there is a guy in Michigan who owns a convenience store or a gas station in Dearborn, and this guy is in a wheelchair, and he was traveling to Lebanon, where he's from, because they allowed stem cell research in a way that was not, that was not controversial at all, and it was cheaper for him to get his medical care by going back to Lebanon for spine treatment that he needed. So this guy gets put on the watch list because he's fleeing our horrid, decrepit healthcare reality that he was experiencing. He had been shot in an attempted robbery. He's going to Lebanon, and then he gets put on the no-fly list because his name was similar to someone else's. And they won't let this guy board the plane. So then he sues, and they say, okay, we've taken you off of it. Next time he goes to the airport, they said, actually, you're still on it. You can't get on the flight. These kinds of stories exist all over the place. But the point is, for certain people, it's like a nuisance. For other people, it can end their life or end their career. But this same watch list that the kid who did the dumb Facebook post, or somebody who said something on Twitter, or someone who actually has espoused thoughts about killing people, they all go into the same system. And that system is the opening database that leads to the people who actually are on the kill list at the end of it. Every single person whose name is on the kill list was assigned at the very beginning a TIDE number, or a TPN number. TIDE is the government's huge database for watch-listed people, and TIDE stands for terrorist. This is a great one for the corporate world. Terrorist Identities Data Mart Environment, the TIDE list. So you can be TIDE. We think of it as like detergent. No, TIDE list is a bad thing. Just like nomination, you do not want to be nominated for this and this. So the TIDE list, over 1 million names. This is an actual watch list. And then there's other ones that are less restrictive. So when it starts ballooning out, and then there's authorizations to tap phones and access data of people 3 hops away, that's a good chunk of the world where they've asserted the right to access that information. And we know from the revelations of Snowden that they were mass bulk collecting the data of Americans. In fact, the United States was the #1 source of data vacuuming that the NSA was engaged in. More than Russia, more than China, more than Iran, the NSA was vacuuming up for the years that the Snowden documents covered up until 2013 in the United States more than anywhere else in the world. And Clapper lied under oath in front of Congress when Ron Wyden asked him, the head of DNI, said, "Are you collecting any data whatsoever on Americans?" And he said, "No, not intentionally." And it was a lie. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He didn't misspeak. It was a lie, a blatant lie. He should have been charged with perjuring himself. But instead, he's still in this position of power where he can listen to anybody's phone call if he wanted to. And that's what happened. You fail upwards in this country when you engage in those kinds of lies and deceptions. It's like that's how business is done. And it was one moment when, because a senator was the one who he lied to, it was one moment where actually we saw a little bit of how they work. See, they just got caught that time. But normally it's they're behind closed doors with the Senate, and they can lie to them all they want, and they do it all the time. But this guy got put on the spot by a rowdy, independent-minded senator from Oregon, and got stuck. No one told them we were going to ask you that question. Why didn't you tell me? Because that's usually how it works. It certainly is how it works when you go in front of Dianne Feinstein at the Intelligence Committee. She gives you all the questions in advance so you can think about your answers, and then you come and we have a friendly discussion. Now we're going to disagree on some things, and I'm going to pretend to ask you tough questions, and you can return the fire, and then oh, how is Buffy? Oh, she's good? Yeah, I'll see you at the cocktail party. That's Washington. That's how it works. Ron Wyden didn't get that memo and accidentally asked a real question at a hearing of an intelligence official, and they're not used to being asked questions like, are you spying on Americans? In open session. So uncouth. He is no longer coming to the CIA Christmas party anymore. That senator is done. But the point is, no one in Congress is ever going to ask a question to which they don't want the answer. Because knowing the answer to these things, or getting the answer, means you might have to actually do something about it. But this idea of metadata collection and passive interception, where they're just dumping everything, or targeted interception, people think, well, what's the problem? There are terrorists, they're communicating, there are people that want to blow up Americans, there are people that want to take down aircraft. All of that is true. Those people exist. And the current way that the world is structured under nation states and flags and national militaries and elected bodies and governments, we have to figure out ways to confront those people. But the way that they've devised to do this is producing the opposite of what they claim they want to be doing. And they're just compiling lists upon lists of people. And then the idea that you're compiling these lists and that you're designating them preemptively as known or suspected terrorists means that you're saying we don't need courts involved. Lawyers aren't involved. People don't have a right to respond. All of this stuff started in terms of the reporting that we're working on from a confidential source. And I just wanted to read you the source who provided us with these documents, but also provided us with, and we publish it in full, the government's 180-page rule book for how you end up on the watch list. They were very, very upset when we published this. And the government forcefully tried to
stop this from being published in a way that if you're interested later, I'll tell you about. But the source who provided us with that wrote an essay, or we published an essay by him in this book. And I just wanted to read, it's short, part of his personal statement that explains why he decided to give us this 180-page government rule book for how to put people on the terror watch list, but also documents about the top secret aspects of the drone program. So this is why I leaked the watch list documents. Over the past few years, we've heard a lot about President Obama's secret kill list. Yet still, we know virtually nothing about its implementation. Despite mild congressional scrutiny and ACLU lawsuits directed at the shroud of secrecy, some basic questions remain unanswered. How do you get on the list? Am I on the list? Who put me on the list? How do you get off the list? Can you get off the list? The truth is there are several such lists used to target individuals for different reasons. Some lists are closely kept, others span multiple agencies, intelligence and local law enforcement. There are lists used to kill or capture supposed high-value targets, and others are intended to threaten, coerce, or simply monitor a person's activity. However, all the lists, whether to kill or to silence, originate from the Terrorist Identities Data Mart environment, and they are maintained by the Terrorist Screening Center at the National Counterterrorism Center. The existence of TIDE is unclassified, yet details about how it functions in our government are completely unknown to the public. In August of 2013, the database reached a milestone of 1 million entries. Today, it is thousands of entries larger and is growing faster than it has since its inception in 2003. The March 2013 watch listing guidance, document I referred to, lays out the broad criteria for nominating someone to the database. Not only does the Terrorist Screening Center reserve the right to store your name, date of birth, and other basic identifying information, but it also stores your medical records, transcripts, and passport data, your license plate numbers, email and cell phone number, along with the phone's international mobile subscriber identity, this is metadata stuff, and international mobile station equipment identity numbers, your bank account numbers and purchases, and other sensitive information including DNA and photographs capable of identifying you using facial recognition software. This is a source who worked on these programs. The National Counterterrorism Center collaborates annually with the agencies from the International Alliance, known as the Five Eyes, to supplement any information missing from entries already in its database, or to add more entries. Individual entries in the database are assigned a TIDE personnel number, or TPN. From Osama bin Laden, we're all going to wait till you answer it. We're all going to say hello to that person. This better be good. You finished? It happens to all of us, don't worry. So everyone on these lists is assigned this TPN number. From Osama bin Laden, and this is TPN 1063599, that was actually bin Laden's number. It's never been public, but now it is. To Abdul Rahman al-Laki, who is the 16-year-old son of Anwar al-Laki, TPN 263501617. Anyone who has ever been the target of a covert operation was first assigned a TPN and closely monitored by all agencies who follow that TPN long before they were eventually put on a separate list and extrajudicially sentenced to death. When governments begin to tally enormous enemies lists, they run roughshod over our essential checks on power, especially when they consider their own citizens to be a threat. Of the more than 1 million entries in the TIDE database, approximately 21,000 of those are American citizens. By leaking this information, if I was a teacher and you were in my class, this would be a very serious issue right here. Okay. Of the more than 1 million entries in the TIDE database, approximately 21,000 are those of American citizens. By leaking this information, and this report, by the way, this is crazy, which is unclassified, but by reverse logic considered too sensitive to be released. The thing was stamped sensitive but unclassified, and it was still considered a crime to provide an unclassified document to journalists. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. I hope to give the public, and mind you, this is someone who, in the midst of record numbers of prosecutions from the Espionage Act, started to leak this information to us. By leaking this information, I hope to give the public an opportunity to know what kind of activity might lead to their being placed on a list used to monitor their everyday activity. For the first time, the public has an opportunity to gain insight into the criteria that could potentially lead to their own trial by drone strike. In 2008, I shook hands with Senator Obama when he came through my town on his way to the White House. After his inauguration, Obama said, quote, "Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency," close quote. I firmly believe those principles are crucial to an open society, which is why I was compelled to reveal this information. If this administration lacks the courage to uphold its promises to the people, then I and others like me will do so for them. That's a pretty incredible. I have to be careful when talking about sources, but I will say that when we published the watch list documents, the president was directly briefed on it, that we were going to be doing this. And then the Counterterrorism Center attempted to, and they've done this to us before, they tried to get a journalist that they considered to be an ally of theirs to do a story in advance of ours that was basically going to be intended to be spin. Like when I exposed the presence of this secret prison in Somalia that was being run by the CIA and Somali intelligence, about an hour before we published that story, the Pentagon and CIA spoke to Barbara Starr, who is the Pentagon spokesperson, the Pentagon correspondent for CNN. She also, it seems like the spokesperson for the Pentagon. And she said, CNN is told by a US official that US intelligence is assisting Somali counterterrorism agents, no such thing, in interrogations of terror suspects. Then our article comes out, which the CIA, I've been dealing with them for weeks on this. They just didn't want me to call it a black site. They basically fed it to a journalist that they knew was going to just sort of parrot their line without even thinking about how they're being used. And they tried to do that with this, but we stopped them. Anyway, the president gets briefed on it, and this was all public. CNN was reporting on it. And then a few weeks later, I get a call from Michael Isikoff, who's a well-known journalist who used to be at Newsweek, and now he's Yahoo News. And he said, do you know anything about this raid? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I'm hearing that they raided the home of someone that they believe is your source. And the government did, in fact, conduct some sort of a raid. It's a matter of public record now, but I'm not going to say whether the place that was raided was the actual source of this or not the source of it, whether they were right or wrong, or what I think about all of that. The point I'm making is that it is very dangerous for people who are working within government now to blow the whistle. And it's not that their car is going to be driven off the road or someone's going to murder them. That's not beyond the pale when you look at U.S. history. But in general, the pattern is that what they're going to do is they're going to ruin you as a person. And that's what they've done to people who did try to blow the whistle from within the system, like Thomas Drake or Bill Binney. They try to ruin them. Or Chelsea Manning, where we weren't allowed to hear Chelsea Manning until an audio recording was leaked out of her her military trial, which the government, we participated in suing the government to open that trial. We won, but they said we had to pay for the transcription services, if we wanted the hearing to be public. So we did it, but several independent news organizations. And we had been made to believe that Chelsea Manning was a scared, confused, disgruntled individual. When she got to speak in her hearing, you heard the voice of a principled person who A, understood what they were doing, and B, said, I take responsibility for it, which was completely against the perception that had been created by the military and by actually President Obama himself when he addressed these issues. Edward Snowden, we're told, well, look where he chose to go. He chose to go to Putin's Russia. Well, that's not what happened. And I was saying earlier this morning at MATC, anyone who doesn't know the basic facts of why Snowden didn't blow the whistle internally, well, he did in ways, but in general, he didn't just stick with internally, and why he ended up in Russia. If you don't know the actual facts about that, then I'm not really interested in what anyone has to say about Edward Snowden and his motives, because the fact was he had seen what the US government did to previous people who actually did blow the whistle internally, and then were targeted, were charged with Espionage Act violations, or had their lives ruined. Thomas Drake works at the Apple store now. He was in a senior position at NSA and was in the Air Force. He was career military, and they ruined his life because he tried to blow the whistle internally. Bill Binney, NSA, same thing. So Snowden sees all of that and realizes that that's not the way to go, and that's why he took the documents to the kinds of journalists that he took them to. But the second thing about him going to Russia, Snowden's passport, and I think it would be stupid not to assume they did have him under surveillance when he was in Hong Kong, and now it can be revealed because it's now public that Snowden was staying in the homes of refugees in Hong Kong who were applying for asylum and were fleeing other countries. I mean, it's really incredible if you think about it. Snowden himself. Did people catch that this story came out recently? Like it's been reported in a number of newspapers. Because now that the Snowden film's coming out, I think that some of the people involved with the story feel like they can safely say some of these things. But he was staying in the home of very vulnerable people because he was vulnerable, and they put him in a place where they thought no one would look. What the U.S. what was being said at the time, he's believed to be residing in the home of a wealthy supporter in Hong Kong. No, he was sleeping on a mat on the floor with, I think, refugees from Burma. I mean, that's who was taking care of Snowden then. Snowden then, they come up with this plan where they're hoping that they've convinced the nominally independent government of Hong Kong to allow Snowden to get onto a plane and go elsewhere. And my understanding, and I have some inside information, but some of it just like everybody else, but reading it, my understanding is that Hong Kong basically said, we want to be neutral on this. We don't want him here anymore, but we also don't want to hand him over to the U.S., so let him be someone else's problem. So they basically said, okay, he can board a plane. He has a passport, and he did. He had a U.S. passport. Gets on that plane. The idea was that Snowden was going to fly from Hong Kong to Moscow and then transfer to a flight to Cuba, and then from Cuba he was going to go on, we believe, to Ecuador. I mean, the negotiations were still happening while he was in the air of who was going to give him asylum, or refugee status. It's all being negotiated. While he's in the air to Moscow, the U.S. government cancels his passport. And they announced that they've canceled his passport because everybody knows now he's on his plane. And then remember this whole thing happened where Snowden was stuck in the Moscow airport, and then finally then the Russians, allow Snowden to come into Moscow. And at that point he had no documents at all with him. You can go online and read people saying that Snowden gave documents to the FSB or other Russian intelligence. Bullshit. Snowden had nothing with him, and he made sure he had nothing with him when he got on that plane. And then when the U.S. thought that Evo Morales of Bolivia had allowed Snowden to be on his plane at a world conference, then the U.S. ordered his plane down. So they downed the plane of the president of a sovereign nation over European airspace, thinking that he was smuggling Snowden out of the country. But so the fact is that Snowden is in Moscow now, not at his choosing, but at the choosing of John Kerry and Barack Obama, who made the decision to cancel his passport, ensuring that he would stay there. And I would not be surprised if we wake up one day and Putin has handed him over to the United States in return for some other prize here. Because I believe Snowden when he says that he has no dealings at all with Russian intelligence on anything having to do with his life as a operative for the NSA or the CIA or any U.S. government entity. You can say I'm naive, but I believe it. And I'd love to see your evidence to the contrary if anyone wants to say it. There's a lot of people saying it, they're just short on facts. The point being that we live in a moment where we were told this transformative president was worthy of all of our enthusiasm and support, and now in the waning days of that presidency, and we look back, what is it that happened over these 8 years? Well, on the one hand, he dealt with a horrid, racist group of bigots who happened to be in very powerful positions in this country. No doubt about that. Record number of death threats ever for a president that, since those things have been recorded in any effective way. The overt and lower intensity racism that this president has endured throughout, including questioning where he was born and what were his father's political views in Kenya, and that is there, that exists, and I think a lot of people felt like they were always in triage between defending Obama when he was being attacked by the bigots and the racists, or attacked for things that genuinely were good that he was trying to do, and then the Obama of empire, who is doing all of this stuff that Dick Cheney really loves, but he just doesn't want you to know that he loves Obama. loves Obama, but he doesn't want you to know it. So Cheney will try to attack Obama, but it's actually, Obama's good for Cheney business. He's good for the idea that wars should be endless and corporations should get all this money and we should be drone bombing anyone we want and Congress has no right to know anything. How do you separate those two realities? You know, Obama the person, I'm sure if I was hanging out with Obama, I would probably like playing basketball with him too. But I don't care about that. I don't like that he's dropping bombs on people around the world, asserting the right to kill even American citizens who haven't been charged with crimes or their 16-year-old children. You know, so what do you do with all of that? What do you do when you have that reality, or your choice is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? It really feels like we're in one of the circles of hell. We're being forced to make this decision. Like, it's like, what do we do? Which is why at the end of the day, I actually think that the reason that the Bernie thing ended up just being such an epic disappointment is because I really am convinced the number one issue that to address on all these things is corporations can no longer be in control of our political system. And it's not just the campaign contributions and elections. People think about, oh, well, gotta get the money out of the election. That's a big thing. But the lobbyists, it's not just about the election stuff. All the money that they have, and then the Citizens United now, where corporations have freedom of our people. Give them the death penalty then. When they execute one of those corporations, I'll believe that they. And I'm against the death penalty for people, but I would support it for certain killer corporations. But if we don't get these corporations out of our politics, then nothing's going to fundamentally change, because that national security bureaucracy, which appeared much darker in the era of Kennedy and Bay of Pigs, and you had this idea that Dulles and these guys really were just sort of evil motherfuckers who wanted to murder people. And I'm sure that that was true and that they were conspiring. But what is it now? Is it really that different from those days when it was the old boys club? There are ways that it probably cosmetically is different. They probably are really committed to hiring gay spies now. We're making sure that we need some more African American assassins, sir. I'm sure they've really diversified, and they really are equal opportunity. They want gay people to kill people just like straight people do. I mean, that's really, but what has changed about that beast? Nothing, because it's not elected. It can wait out any Democratic election. It can wait out an Obama. It could wait out a Bush. They don't like this direction? Okay, fine. We'll just sit out for a little while, but we'll always come back. And the machine itself, its primary concern is its own existence. And they have the greatest selling point to a new president that comes in, where they can say, oh, well, there will be another attack in this country if we don't do this, this, and this. Who's going to have the spine when they walk into office to say, oh, well, General, Admiral, Mr. Director, Mrs. Director, Director, no, we're going to stop all of this stuff. I'm not saying those kind of people don't exist. I'm saying they are not going to get into the White House with this system where corporations pay for the presidency. So that leaves us with having to do something that really requires us thinking about things at a local level and up from there. And that's the hard business of breaking a duopoly or addressing corporate money. There are a lot of people in Wisconsin and other states that I've met who have been working on this for many years, and it's an uphill battle. And the big disappointment of Bernie, and it's not all on Bernie, but of that moment in our time here, is that for the first time, the choir all of a sudden was really large. And the number of people that were hearing the choir was much bigger than it's been in a long time in terms of fundamental issues. But it peters out with the sort of predictable, hold your nose and vote for this candidate, when it could have been something different. So I think, we all have to kind of, in the wake of that, step back and sort of look where we're at right now and see what was magical about that moment when all of a sudden some of these issues were being talked about, and how that can impact us going forward. I've talked for a very long time, so I'm happy to hear you talk here, but thank you to the Madison Public Library, to WORT, the Wisconsin Book Festival, and also to you. And is there air conditioning in here that could be turned on? Anyway, thank you guys very much.